Okay, so good evening, everyone, and it is great pleasure in welcoming Professor Akeel Bilgrami today to for this very special asset colloquium. And it turns out, in fact, to my great pleasant surprise, that if you see the database of asset colloquium, you will also find that he actually gave his first asset colloquium way back in 2005 and December 16th, almost exactly 17 years ago. And it's great that he is back here to talk about a completely different topic, I guess, today. And before we even move further, I would like to kind of thank many of my colleagues who are instrumental in making this visit and asset possible. Srirup, Arvind, and Jay Kumar, and of course, Chandrasekhar Khare. So without taking more of the speaker's time, I would like to request Chandrasekhar for formally introducing today's speaker and conducting the rest of the proceedings. Thank you very much.
Hello? Yeah, okay. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Professor Akeel Bilgrami from Columbia. He's the Sidney Morgenbesser Professor of Philosophy at Columbia. And he's grown up in Bombay, and we have some friends of his from his Bombay school days in the audience. Also, I think Akeel spent some time in TIFR in the early 70s, is that right? Early 70s, you spent some time? Yeah. So he has a long-standing association with TIFR. So just in terms of his biography, he's got a first degree in English literature from Elphinstone College, Bombay, not far from here. Went to Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar. He's been a professor at Columbia for a long time. And he's going to talk to us about is the concept of truth strictly only applicable to the propositions of science. So I think Akeel is going to kind of make us think very hard and harder than we as mathematicians and scientists normally do on technical talks. We're going to think about more fundamental questions. There'll be question and answer session after the... Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So, it's a curious fact that ever since the rise of modern science in the 17th century, broadly speaking, there began to be a view, almost an ideological outlook around modern science, which got consolidated over subsequent centuries, that there's something about the methods and the outcomes of the methods, the achievements of modern science, which makes it absolutely clear that the concept of truth, strictly speaking, that is to say, not by courtesy, but strictly speaking, applies only to the propositions of science. that if we were to apply it to, say, the propositions about morals or about art or literature or even just human history, there is something second class. I mean, that's an invidious way of putting it, but from the point of view of truth, there's something second class about those propositions. Not, they may be more significant, they may be more important for us human beings, but from the point of view of truth strictly understood, truth doesn't apply to them except by way of metaphor or just a trope or figure of speech. So this is a view that's really developed since the 17th century. And the way I put it, it's very vaguely formulated. No particular reason for it is given. Sounds like, as I said, an ideological view. It sounds like maybe a very, very lofty prejudice. So I'm going to first begin by presenting what is a very common argument given by philosophers. It was famously given by a very celebrated philosopher of the last century, Hilary Putnam, repeated in an even more sophisticated way by the philosopher Bernard Williams. And these philosophers give you an argument for what might otherwise seem like a prejudice in favor of science vis-a-vis the concept of truth. So, of course, to give an argument is to then clinch it. It's no longer a prejudice. So what is this argument that philosophers tend to give to elevate science to this special status regarding the tracking the truth in a way that no other subject does? The argument goes something like this. Science is the only cognitive enterprise, it is said. It's the only cognitive enterprise which builds on each other's results and converges. There's a convergence onto what can only be called the truth. So no other subject has this feature, which is you get a result, and then you build on it, and you get a further result, and you build on it, and you get a more systematic, structured result. You build on that, you get, and so on. Literary criticism doesn't do that. No other discipline does that. Only science, the only cognitive enterprise which does that. So the argument is, how do you explain that this enterprise alone has this feature of convergence, accumulation and convergence of results? How do you explain it? And the answer is, the only explanation is that it is talking about real things, not constructed things. And therefore, only its propositions can properly be called truth. Right? That is, the reality of its posits, electrons as it might be, quarks, whatever, fields, the reality of its posits has to be brought in as an explanation for this unique property of accumulation and convergence. Because it has this, it must be tracking the truth. So, its posits are real, and its propositions are capable of true and false in the strict sense, right? Its theoretical terms, posits, are and its propositions are true. That's the argument. Unique cognitive inquiry which has this property. There's no other explanation for this property but that its proposits are real and it's tracking the truth. So, I want to ask, if the argument is clear enough for you, I want to ask, when did this convergence begin? Did it begin with the history of human thought? Did we start converging and accumulating from the beginning of human thought? Surely not. There must have been any number of false starts, false leads that got nowhere for centuries. I'm not denying this fact. I'm just denying that its genealogy is as ancient as the beginnings of human thought. So, if you look at these philosophers, the work of these philosophers who make this argument, they're sure enough, they're not responding to this question because nobody posed this question to them, but they sure enough say, if you read their texts, they say it started sometime in the 17th century. This convergence and accumulation began sometime in the 17th century. So now I want to ask, why? Why did it start there? And I came across a phrase. So when I started scrutinizing these essays, papers, I came across the phrase. I noticed that they all were clear that it started in the 17th century, just by the examples they gave. And the rationale for starting in the 17th century was that this is when they got onto the right start. That it's only in the 17th century that they got onto the right start, and then this process of accumulation and convergence began, which can only be explained by bestowing on them this privilege of the truth predicate. Okay, so now if you bring in through these questions, if you bring in the fact that this is what they're saying, that this began here, and because this was the right start, I want to ask, well, what is this word doing here? What is this word right? It looks as if you don't need this argument to establish truth. You already got it presupposed by the argument. The argument is not delivering you the concept of truth. It's presupposing what it's supposed to deliver. So I'm just going to presume that this is a prejudice. There is no argument. I, in fact, think the concept of truth can't be defined. It's an indefinable, primitive concept, but that's not going to surface in the rest of what I say. So, I mean, I don't think it needs an argument. Concept of truth is just primitive. It's part of our conceptual repertoire for just making our way through the world. It doesn't need any argument. But anyway, this is the edifice. The argument is the edifice that is constructed by philosophers. And it has this fatal flaw that it presupposes the very thing it's supposed to be arguing for. Okay, so I'm going to proceed then on the assumption that there is no argument, that this is a high sort of an assumption of the privilege of science. And so I now want to give you my own argument. Let me start, if we have time, I'll go on to talk about literature and the humanities and so on. But let me just start with morals, because you don't have to know very much literature or literary theory or criticism to grasp the point. I want to present an argument to say that the propositions of morals, which we make more or less every day in our lives, are capable of being assessed for truth, because they are describing properties in the world around us, the propositions of morals. Now, this may be very counterintuitive for many of you. It's certainly been denied by many philosophers, most particularly the ones I just described and tried to give an argument from. So I'm going to present this argument for why values are, moral values, let's say, let's stick to moral values. We'll talk about aesthetic values later. If there's time, moral values are properties in the world, in the perceptible world. And propositions like, that's a good thing to do, that's a considerate thing to do, etc., are describing real properties in the world. That river or that forest has value is describing a real property of the forest or river. Now, this began to be denied roughly in the 17th century in a process that Max Weber described as disenchantment of the world. So Weber described the desacralization of nature as a disenchantment of the world. And it developed into, again, I think there is no other word for it but ideology. It developed into an outlook or ideology, which I think is a superstition of modernity. No reason to think that only tradition has superstition. It's a superstition of modernity, which is the claim that there's nothing in nature that is not countenanced by the natural sciences. This is a very widely held view ever since the 17th century. It's not a widely held, may not be a widely held view by ordinary people, but it's a widely held view by philosophers. And as Wittgenstein said, the view is so absurd that only a philosopher would believe it. And it's the idea that if you evacuate nature from the sacred, something that nature was assumed to possess for centuries in traditional societies, still is in indigenous societies. But suppose in the 17th century, as a result of the growth of modern science, we cannot believe that the world contains sacral properties. Now I want to ask, but it seems an illicit inference from that it doesn't possess value properties. That is, we might very well, because we can't any longer think in terms of the sacred and so on. But some people might not want to think in, and it certainly began in the European society that people didn't after the 17th century. The sacred got evacuated from nature, but by what right did value get evacuated from nature? It is true that for many centuries, people simply thought the ground for value was the sacred. But if you no longer believe that, there is no reason to therefore think that value isn't sui generis, that it doesn't need sacred ground. So, what I want to ask is, why can't we have, sticking with Weber's rhetoric, called it the disenchantment of the world, because of the desacralization, why can't we have a secular enchantment of the world, where nature, world around us, possesses value properties, so, that's what I'm going to argue. Louder.
This is also an opportunity to adjust it properly. That's why it is a little low. Shall we do this?
Yeah.
Remove this. Remove this? Yes. Yeah, please. Also, I just want to tell you, you can move the screen.
Very good. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to give you an argument to show why we not only, first I'll try and show why it's natural to think, it's completely natural to think that value properties are properties in the world we perceive, but then I want to make it stronger a little later downstream and say we must think of it as possessing value properties. So I'm going to begin with a thought that many of us have all day long. So now, first, my immediate ambition is to show that it's completely natural to think value properties are properties in the world we perceive around us. So I'm going to begin the argument by saying this is something we frequently think and say. It's completely natural locution. But this is radically ambiguous thought or proposition. It's ambiguous between I intend that will do, and I predict that I will do this. So we constantly say this naturally each day of our lives. By it, we sometimes mean this, and we sometimes mean this. And it's very fascinating that we can't mean, though we can mean I intend that I will do X by it, can mean I predict that I will do X by it, we can't do those things at the same time. Try it. The one crowds the other out. You can go from here to here very quickly. but you can't think it together. And the reason is that here we are taking an engaged point of view on ourselves. Whereas here, we're taking a detached and disengaged point of view on oneself. I might as well be talking about an eclipse when I say this. I predict that an eclipse will occur. Right? I'm looking at it in a completely detached way. But here I'm not. My angle on myself here is one of agency, practical agency. Of course, when I'm looking in a detached way, I'm thinking, and thinking is an engagement, but the engagement is detached. That is, it's a detached angle in my thinking. As a result, this use of the word I is referring to an object. This use of the word I is an agent. This use of the word I is an agent. This use of the word I is an agent. It's just this use of the word I where I've just objectified myself. I see myself as I might see an eclipse. I might as well use a proper name. I see myself as you might see me. So this is just an object. Now, somebody like Sartre made a meal of this. And I think Sartre, for instance, thought that this having this angle on oneself is just all bad faith. You really are here, and you're pretending to be here, and he calls it bad faith, and so on. I think that's just not plausible. I think we can quite honorably, at any bad faith, sometimes say this. I'm constantly. It's within 24 hours of having made an intention to hand an essay over to some editor as a deadline, I predict that I will not do it. It's completely honorable, true prediction. I know I will not meet the deadline. This is just procrastination is the cancer of my soul. I will not meet the deadline. I know it. So, so it's perfectly possible to do this. I think Sartre totalized this point of view, the agent's point of view. Like a good existentialist, he had a form of this detached or disengaged point of view. He didn't believe it. He just thought, in fact, he thought psychoanalysis was a regime of bad faith. Because you sort of gazed at yourself and objectified yourself, denying your agency, etc. Well, but it's an interesting thing. It's a very interesting thing that even if Sartre's wrong, and we sometimes can certainly have this attitude on ourselves, a disengaged attitude on ourselves. In fact, we can have a disengaged, if something like psychoanalysis or some discipline of the regime of that kind can actually help us improve our agency. I mean, if I constantly am losing my temper or something, and I step back and ask in a very detached way, why did I lose my temper then? Why do I feel angry about this? I might actually be able to control my anger in the future. I might actually have more agency as a result of suspending agency and learning things. That's the point of psychoanalysis. It liberates you for getting over certain things that come in the way of your unneurotic, path through the world. So we can certainly enhance our agency even by stepping back and studying ourselves and, but, and here's the interesting thing, we can't do that all the time. That is, taking a disengaged point of view on ourselves can be highly beneficial, but you can't comprehensively take a disengaged view on yourself. Because that would be to abdicate your agency altogether. So if you never had this point of view on yourself, the agentive point of view, you would have given up your practical agency. If you only had this attitude towards yourself. And that's so that's a very fascinating thing. The very thing, when writ small, can be beneficial and even improve your agency, when writ large, undermines it. If you only had this point of view on yourself, you're not an agent. You have to have this point of view on yourself some of the time to be an agent. And if you only gaze at yourself and you were an object, you wouldn't ever be an agent. All right, so I'm going to put that down as a proposition to keep in mind. I will return to it. It's absolutely crucial stage in the argument. So let me call that proposition P. Oh, let's call it A for agency. If all we had was a detached angle on ourselves, a disengaged angle on ourselves, we would not be practical agents. Sorry, terrible handwriting. If all we had was a detached angle on ourselves, i.e. this angle on ourselves, we would not be agents. Okay? So I'm calling that proposition A, and I will come back to it later. Okay, now notice sorry to be so calm. Oh, this, I see. This. Thank you. Thank you very much. So please keep this in mind, because it will occur further downstream. Now, if these are two different points of view on oneself, points of view are general things. So it's it should be perfectly possible to say that we have this point of view and this point of view not just on ourselves, as these examples, these ambiguities of I will reflect, but these two points of view can be points of view on, not just on the self, this I is here, but on the world around the self. Surely I can have a disengaged, detached point of view of study of the world, but I can have an engaged point of view on the world. Natural science is par excellence the paradigmatic form of disengaged point of view on the world. It's the most highly regimented and rule-bound way of taking this angle on the world. Right? Studying yourself, making explanations, making predictions, predict things in the world. So natural science is is the paradigm of this. It's the most regimented version of it. You can have more informal versions of it, but natural science is the most carefully constructed exercise of this angle on the world. So, therefore, studies certain properties in the world in this engaged way, H2O as it might be, etc. Okay. So now let's ask if the disengaged point of view sees the world as possessing the properties that natural science studies, H2O, chlorophyll, etc. What does this point of view in the world assume the world to possess? What properties does it take the world to possess? The most natural thing in the world is to say it produces. It takes it for granted new properties. When I see value properties around me, my practical agency is triggered. When I see the properties of this kind that's studied here, then my explanatory and predictive and other things are triggered. Yeah, those are not practical agency, that's theoretical, speculative, that's explanation, prediction, etc. So I've started with an absolutely everyday natural thing to say, and I've just teased out of it with inferential steps, none of which are obscure or difficult at all, elementary steps, but the conclusion that it's completely natural to talk about value properties. After all, if we say things like that, which are completely natural, and that hides all this, then it's completely natural to believe that value properties are in the world. Okay, so that's an argument of limited ambition, because I've only told you that it's natural to believe that there are value properties in it. To say something is natural to believe is to say you can believe it without strain, without any intellectual strain or effort. It's a natural thing to believe. And I want to argue for something more ambitious, which is that humans believe that there are value properties in the world. All right, so for that, I want to apply. Do you have about 15 minutes more? Yeah. Yeah? Okay. So, for that I'm not changing the subject at all, but I'm going to introduce a little bit more apparatus, okay, just conceptual apparatus. Here's a very interesting phenomenon. It was noticed by a brilliant philosopher who actually taught me at Oxford. His name is Gareth Evans. He's one of the most brilliant people I've ever known. He died tragically early, these early 30s of lung cancer. And in a book called The Varieties of Reference, he made this very insightful and brilliant remark. He said, you know, it's a funny thing about belief, that if you and I are asked, do you believe it's raining? Or do you believe it's sunny, let's say? You look outside. I mean, if I just asked you, you know, don't think of philosophy. I'll just ask you, you're sitting near a window in a cafe, and I said, do you believe it's raining? You immediately look outside. But that's a very interesting thing, because that's what you do when you're asked, is it raining? As well. You do the same thing when you're asked about the world and your belief about the world. You look at the world. And he says, isn't this a curious thing? That you look at the world even when you're asked about your mind. You don't say, okay, let me scan my interior. Does it possess the belief that you don't do that? You might do it in a psychoanalyst chair and so on, but by and large, you don't do it. Right? Now, I want to ask, I want to extend Evans's insight here and say, that the same thing is true if you're asked, do you desire anything, X? Or do you value X? I'm just taking desire and value for the moment to be proximate. Yeah, you can make a distinction between them, but those are distinctions that are not relevant to what I really want to immediately argue. I just want something which is close to belief, like a desire. Now, I want to extend Evans's point and say, if you're asked, do you desire X? You don't scan your interior. You don't say, let me see if the desire for X. No, you consider the desirability of X. You summon X in your mind to see, is it desirable? You might sometimes say, do I really desire this? But just, again, I'm asking you to think of the quotidian case. You ask, do you desire this? You get a sense of, yes, that's desirable, you know. But if that's right, then there are desires, which are states of mind, and then there are desirabilities, which are states of the world, properties of X. The desirabilities, values. So it isn't as if this is desires, and that's all there is. Value is nothing but desires and your valuings in your mind. They're responses to desirabilities. Now, if you've got the direction of where this argument is going, suppose somebody were to say, no, Evans is right about beliefs, but you're not right about desires. Right? Evans is right about beliefs. They are, if you, the belief that it's sunny, you look outside, and so there are facts out there. It's being sunny. The sunniness, the property out there in nature, and you believe you're tracking the world and its properties. Here you say, no, Evans can be right about how you look at the world when you're asked about the world and about a belief about the world, but it doesn't hold of desires. That would be the challenge to me, to what I'm saying. Okay, so if that is the challenge to me, then the idea would be that values or desirabilities, value properties or desirabilities, are reducible to valuings or desires, to states of mind. That is indeed how Adam Smith talked of it, talked of moral sentiments. Both Adam Smith and David Hume talked of moral sentiments. So all that are, the only real things are these, our preferences, our valuings, there are no values or desirabilities in the world. Right? So values are, these desires are not responses to desirabilities. Valuings are not responses to value properties. They're a self-standing phenomena of the mind. Whereas what I'm claiming is, these are responses to these. That's the dispute. Right? Now, suppose pose this challenge to me. Say, no. Let Evans be right about beliefs. We're not granting you the extension of his point to desires. Desires, valuings are self-standing states of mind. They're not. So for me, they're not self-standing. They're responses to something that's in the world. And for these Smith and Hume and this general modern prejudice, they are states of mind, completely self-standing, not responsive to anything that could be called value properties. Okay. Suppose for a moment that Adam Smith is right. And there's no more to values than desires, moral sentiments, etc. States of mind. That would mean that if I ask myself, what is my relationship to these desires when they are not responses to anything, but they're self-standing? What is my relationship to them? Only be that they are in my mind, and I step back and scan my interior, just as what I'm denying, scan my interior and say, yes, I have that desire. But that means I have to step out and take a detached observation of myself. That means I have to do this. But if all my relations to all my desires are of this kind, then I step back and say, does Bilgrami possess this? Do I? But the I here is an object because I'm just, staring at myself in this detached way. And if all my relationship to all my desires are of that form, then I've abdicated my practical agency. That means I am not, according to this view, I'm not supposed to be what I manifestly am. A practical agent. Think of it this way. Take the proposition X is desirable. And take the proposition X is desired by me. I mouth both those propositions. I have both those thoughts. X is desired by me. X is desirable. When I have the thought X is desired by me, X is not motivating me at all. It's the object, a leaden object of my detached gaze. You think of it, X is desired by me. X is not going to move me to act. I'm looking at it in a detached way. It has no motivating power for me. It's when I see X as desirable, when my relationship, my desire is not directly observing the desire, but rather presupposed by my finding X desirable, that my desire will motivate me. Adam Smith has no account of the motivating power of desire that makes us practical agents. Adam Smith stands for all of the modern outlook on the nature of nature, the nature of value, and that's the view that this argument is supposed to be repudiating. I can stop, just as you like. So basically, what I've tried to show is that it's a superstition of modernity to think that the world around us doesn't possess value properties that prompt our practical agency, and it's a completely widespread view. They think you've introduced some spook into the world if you introduce something, the world is containing properties that the natural sciences can't study. And the spook of the sacred, which we're supposed to, in our up-to-the-minute modernity, have gotten rid of, why should we illicitly extrapolate from that there can't be secular properties that the natural sciences can't study in the world, in the perceptible world around us? Why not? Only an outlook which elevated science to a kind of centrality in culture which it never possessed. Aristotelian science did not possess the kind of centrality that modern science possesses in our culture. Now, our culture, I'm not necessarily talking about this particular location of many parts of the world. The idea that the whole world has been enveloped by modernity is absurd. I'm talking about Europe, I'm talking about the part of the world which uses self-congratulatory self-descriptions like modernity, enlightenment, and so on. Well, there are real problems, just philosophical problems, of evacuating the world of something which is both natural to say, and if we think we're agents, practical agents, we must say. Now, of course, you can take the view that, okay, so we're not practical agents. Well, I have no argument against that, except to say, come off it. Thanks. Yeah. Somebody.
I'm not a philosopher, so
Okay.
I won't use the right words. But this is regarding the. I'm not a philosopher, so I will not use the right words. But you use the examples of belief and give the example belief and the second one was desire. Now, two qualities that I think that these two values do not have is, or do not need, is one, consistency, even consistency across one's own state of mind, and secondly, objectivity, which is across, if you want to call the world an object as desirable or a belief as existing, it may not be the same in the states of mind of two different people. So, yeah. So where does this lead to?
That's good. That's excellent. That's right. I think what is absolutely true, and I've said nothing against it. I think it's obviously true that these properties, desirabilities or value properties, may differ from culture to culture, may differ from person to person. Right? What I perceive as cruel. I mean, if I perceive that lynching a Muslim is cruel, and many people don't perceive that as cruel, right? Then we can have differential perceptions of value properties. So let's say cruelty is a value property. It's a disvalue property, but we're talking about value and disvalue. It's, it can take a negative form. So there's cruelty. And some people just, my way of putting it is, some people don't perceive it. If value properties are really there in the world, then you can have a value illusion. You can have a value illusion. I give an example. A few years ago, I went with a friend of mine who was buying a car, and he started finding desirability in an SUV. And I said, listen, this is a value illusion, right? But you can say, oh no, he has, he's going to have. No, my view is that you can have value illusions, right? If you don't perceive cruelty in this lynching, or if you see desirability in SUV, then you got it wrong. That's what that word right was doing some work for me, but you've got it wrong. Now, there can be honest disagreement, right? There can be honest disagreement about what you're perceiving. I'm not denying that there's ethical deliberation, moral deliberation, but we have ethical deliberation when we have conflicting value perceptions, right? So, I mean, even within myself, not just with my friend who's buying a car, but even within myself, I'd go in. So I'm not saying all of ethics is perception. I'm not saying see cruelty and you are moved to practical agency, and that's it. If you see conflicting desirabilities, right? I mean, just forget about ethics. Just think of, you go to your cafeteria. You see a chicken sandwich, and you see an avocado sandwich, and you say, this is desirable, this is desirable. And then you have to deliberate. This may be unhealthy, this may be more delicious. Whatever. You rank and weigh and all the ethical deliberation. But the primary thing is, and that's true when it's not my conflicting perceptions, but my conflicting with some other culture or some other person. What do? We deliberate. We talk to each other. I mean, after all, this happens in science, I assume. I mean, there are examples that are given by Kuhn, right? Where Kuhn says somebody who's internalized a certain theory of light will see waves, whereas another person sees particles. Just right there, we'll see waves where the other person sees particles. Okay, so you've got to talk. Right? You've internalized conflicting things, so you see different things. It doesn't mean that there's no world out there. And there are no physical properties in the world. You don't give up on physics, just as Adam Smith is asking you to give up on a world of value properties just because things conflict. You've got to sit and talk. You've got to sit and argue. What is true, and that I won't deny, is that argument in science takes a codified form. The actual rules, the actual protocols of what is confirmation, what is not, etc. It's much less vague. It's much more vague when it comes to morals, or certainly to literary perception of what is valuable in Middlemarch, say, right? And so there's no rule. There's no set of. It's not codified. It's not like deductive rationality, which is deductive logic codifying it. There's no confirmation theory as you have in inductive logic, say. But that doesn't mean it's not real. That just means that's the difference between science and morals, or science and literary criticism, etc. That's the difference. Not truth and real properties out there, but no rules. But it's a conflation and confusion to go from the fact that there's differential perception which can't be settled by invoking a set of rules to say there's no properties there. That's a non sequitur of numbing grossness.
I brought this thing up because in science, we do consider consistency and objectivity as two of the properties of truth, so to say. Objectivity and consistency.
But wait, I'm insisting that they're both objective. Look, it's not as if they're. If somebody says this is good and somebody says this is not good, right? One of them is right. You shouldn't confuse. I'm not denying. So when there's conflict, both can't be right. Okay. What is true is that there isn't always conflict. Right? If there's incommensurability, if there's you can't really compare things, then I think the thing to say both can be right. Right? If they're not comparable, they're not rubbing up against each other, right? I mean, if I say mountains are big and you say newspapers are interesting, they're both true. We're talking about, it's completely incommensurate. So why, there's no conflict, they're both true. But if they conflict, then we do what we do anywhere in science or anything else. We sit and talk and we try and figure it out. Not by rules in the one case, not by protocols that have been laid down in a logic. That's the difference. Yes.
I would like to take your argument to the field of aesthetics.
Aesthetics.
Yes. So, and if you allow me to summarize and paraphrase your argument, so is the beauty in the eyes of the beholder, or is beauty a property of the world that you are seeing? So the same analysis would be applicable to this scenario as well.
Right.
But in the case of aesthetics, it's not a question of right and wrong. So two people can look at it, one person can find it beautiful, other person can find it ugly, and both can make a painting of or a sculpture of that. Okay,
well,
so there will be two versions of truth. I mean, then how does one? I mean, then there seems to me a logical problem there, because it's not the question of right and wrong. Nobody has said it in the beginning that this is the right thing. What you started your lecture with, that they had assumed the righteousness of their enterprise and in the beginning.
No, but you see, I'm saying that if I say, take this overworked term beauty, if I say something is beautiful and you say it's not, I'm saying you should see it as a conversation starter, not a conversation stopper. What I'm saying is, look, let's take the example of Middlemarch. The word beauty, you must remember that in the history of aesthetic, the word beauty was always used, was brought in only because beauty moves us. There is no doubt that beauty moves us, and that is why it was introduced as a term by which to understand literary criticism, or by which to deploy in literary criticism. But it's a very omnibus word. It can stand for so many particular things. Right? But it was introduced because we know that beauty moves us. Right? And I'm saying that a literary work moves us. And when you get it right, you read a book as it's supposed to be read, as you ought to read it. If I say that that you read Middlemarch and you read about Castlebar, and it moves you to try and overcome your insecurities and your resentments of other people more successful than you. It moves you. Now, things like that have been summarized by statisticians and so on as, one person sees the beauty is a term summarizing all sorts of things like this. In fact, I would say beauty is a misspelling of duty. And it always had in aesthetics. It was always intended as pedagogic, as moving you into various
Actually, I was not using beauty in that sense. I was using beauty in the sense, in a wider sense of the entire spectrum of aesthetic response, of awe, of disgust, of any emotional, thing which as an artist I will. Which will be my starting point.
But emotions can be, as Eliot said, emotions can have an objective reality. You can't just be, you just can't have emotions. I mean, if you say Hussein's painting of Bharat Mata has offended me, I'm upset. Well, are you getting the painting right? Is a question that anybody should ask. You can't just say, I'm offended. Your offense might be irrational because it doesn't speak to the properties that demand you to have a certain response. If it ain't there, your offense has got no objective correlative. It's wrong. It's irrational. And literary criticism, art criticism, directs you to experience the work as the work demands it to be experienced. Exactly what I'm saying about as the value properties demand you to have desires.
There are two questions from the YouTube.
Uh-huh.
I will read out for you if you could quickly answer them. One question is from Tupa Khan. The question is, for me, the words desire and detached do not get along. As desire of X.
Can I read it?
Unfortunately, it is. I think I can bring it. Just.
I think you had it up just now.
No. This is on the YouTube. So, yeah, here.
Oh, I see. To me, the words desire and detached do not get along. Good. Yes, I agree with you. There's a tone of disagreement in your question, but you should erase it because we actually agreed. The only thing I don't understand is why there's a tone of disagreement.
No, but then there's as a desire of X has a lot to do with amount of engagement and impact X has on us. So do you agree with this? So that is
Yes, that was my point. That desire has got to do with engagement. So we're completely agreed. And if that's being posed as a challenge, I think there's some misapprehension of what I was saying. So what's the next question?
Yeah, the next question is Avinash Pandey. Says, can we say that cognition is dependent upon our interactions with the world, that is physical and social, and that truth is dependent upon cognition?
Yes, I think that's right. That was what what I meant by, if you've internalized the right different theories, you might see different phenomena, like the waves and particles one is commonly used thing. So background of theory of cognition is dictates. Look, what I will grant, here's a thing that's worth observing, I think, but I don't think make very much of it. And that is, there's something about, say, literature that isn't as immediate as the way it moves you as moral properties do. So let's just let's say you're driving past and you see some Muslim being lynched. So you stop the car and you're moved by the cruelty to say, stop that. Right? Let's say you're moved immediately by the cruelty. So morals immediately moves you, right? The example I gave of how reading about Casaubon might have an effect on you obviously doesn't have that immediacy that it changes your maybe way of thinking, maybe it's to use the current jargon, it's more flying. It's just it's one step removed, but I insist it's a very small step. This is not a deep difference between art or literature and morals. I think there are many examples of moral perception that move us perhaps more directly. I think the online-offline distinction would be quite a good one way of putting it, actually. It hadn't occurred to me till just now, but it's I think, a good way to put the difference. And sometimes literature can be very direct. That's why I say it's a very small step. But maybe by and large, its effects percolate in you. You get a very general sense. It doesn't happen with the same immediacy. That I would grant. Of the difference within values between the aesthetic or literary and the.
Thank you very much for wonderful lecture. So I request Chandra to kind of give you a small memento from or souvenir from TIFR. It's a wonderful collection of TIFR art collections, which of course has many Hussains and many other painters as well. So I hope you like it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you very much, all of you, for not only patient for listening, but also bringing up something new insight by asking these questions. Also, thank all the participants from the social media channels as well. Please join for a cup of tea by the side of your stand. Thank you.